Think military traditions are all about drill and discipline? Think again. Some are practical, sure, but others, well, let's just say they are unforgettable. These quirky and sometimes downright bizarre rituals are designed to bring service members closer, forging bonds that only the military can understand. From growing bulletproof mustaches to downing questionable concoctions, these traditions will give you a peek into a world that's equal parts intense and intriguing. Ready to see what really keeps military teams tight-knit? Let's dive in. If you think Movember is the only time mustaches make a statement, you haven't heard of Mustache March. This Air Force tradition takes facial hair to the next level, honoring not just style, but a spirit of defiance rooted in one unforgettable Air Force hero, Brigadier General Robin Olds. Olds served as a fighter pilot in both World War II and the Vietnam War, with a career total of 16 confirmed victories, making him a triple ace. He was one of America's most famous fighter pilots of the 20th century. He was even married to a movie star for 29 years, the actress Ella Raines. The so-called bulletproof mustache he sported during Vietnam wasn't just for good luck. The brass often ordered Olds to shave the mustache since it went against regulation, but he refused, calling it the middle finger I couldn't raise in PR photographs. It was basically his way of letting the guys at HQ know he was dissatisfied with how they were prosecuting the war. He would later say that the mustache wasn't doing much for him, but it had become a symbol of his unit, the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing, so he kept it. The tradition held. Flag officers in the Air Force often now encourage Mustache March as a way to bring airmen closer together. In 2014, then Air Force General Chief of Staff Mark Welsh challenged the service to participate in an all-in Mustache March with competitions. Welsh then shared 2 pictures of himself, one with his real mustache and one with a photoshopped version of a very long and drooping mustache, but warned the airmen under his command that they shouldn't even dream of doing the same thing. He insisted that checks would be in place to ensure that mustache photos were not doctored. And not to leave anyone out, he invited the airwomen to participate. Although they couldn't be expected to grow mustaches, they were needed to inspect and ridicule what Welsh called the idiotic look that these mustaches will have on most of us, as we all try to look like Tom Selleck and end up looking like a 3-haired mole. The United States Air Force is by far the most formidable thing in the world's skies, but even for its professionals, it's fine to poke a little fun at each other. Unfortunately, not everything is so fun. The United States Army has a much stranger tradition that might be hard for recruits to stomach, literally. This is the infamous grog bowl. One look at it in pictures will probably tell you that it isn't the sort of thing you're likely to have fun with. In a normal party or celebration, you'd expect refreshments like a punch bowl or various alcoholic beverages at a bar. There is some of that in the grog bowl that the Army puts out at its various parties, but its final form is much different than anything you would likely be used to or even want to hear about. So we're telling you. The grog bowl starts with water. It could have some alcoholic beverages poured in after that, alright, but it could also have coffee, chunks of old food, rocks, dirty socks, just plain dirt, or even parts of boots. In fact, anything can wind up in the grog bowl before the party swings into high gear, though the precise formula is usually based off the role of the unit that hosts the party. Since these units tend to have their own, smaller traditions, those are the things that will show up in the grog bowl. For example, alcoholic drinks in the grog bowl might be a local speciality that reflects where the unit is based. A party is often hosted before a unit goes on deployment, and that's another thing that can influence what ultimately gets put in the grog bowl. A unit about to face deployment to a desert environment might put sand in their event's grog bowl. Occasionally, units from other branches of the armed forces will make their own grog bowls, although it's likely that many sailors, marines, and airmen probably wish this tradition stayed with the Army. And just to make things a little worse, sometimes a toilet is used as the container for the grog, rather than a punch bowl. No, the toilet hasn't been used, but when you're being asked to drink something that already looks so nasty, the additional act of having it served to you in a toilet probably isn't the nicest thing to see. Despite the unpleasant reality of the grog bowl, the tradition remains durable. Another one, known as getting pinned or getting blood wings, is also unpleasant, but this one is not encouraged. Pins on uniforms are an important component of identification. They display a service member's name, rank, unit, qualifications, and commendations. These are all marks of accomplishment, but some service members might not feel so good the first time these get pinned on them. The unspoken rule is that when a service member acquires a new pin, such as a promotion or certification, other service members who already have such a pin get to affix the badge to their comrade's uniform, over and over again, pinning it deeper and deeper, and there's no backstop to guard the wearer's skin from the sharp points. By the end of the day, the newly promoted or certified service member will have a few blood stains on the uniform, to say the least. The tradition probably goes back to World War II paratrooper rituals, but has become more widespread. The military brass doesn't like it though. This act meets the definition of hazing and it's banned. 10 Marines who have been caught giving their comrade blood wings on camera in 1993 were punished when the video became public in 1997. One of them was even recommended for a discharge. The practice persists, and those who have come out of the other side of it still consider it an honor, but anyone taking part in it is getting into dangerous terrain. There's another seemingly odd tradition that takes place in the brain of the US Army, but it's one that at least lets all of the cadets know that the service appreciates their efforts. Naturally, this one has the brass's full backing. The United States Military Academy at West Point is the nation's oldest educational institution for commissioning officers into the country's armed forces. Its alumni have included 2 presidents of the United States, Ulysses S. Grant and Dwight D. Eisenhower, and many of the country's most famous and accomplished flag officers. However, West Point makes sure to give all of the cadets their due. Starting in the 19th century, West Point began honoring the lowest scoring graduate in each year's class. In the 1960s, each cadet began donating $1 into a special fund that would go to the lowest scoring graduate. Then, during the graduating ceremony, the dean calls the lowest scorer forward, takes a photo with the cadet, and awards a container with about $1,000 inside. The cadet is then known as the class GOAT and receives huge applause from comrades, the loudest of the day. This is a mark of respect that's more profound than it appears. West Point is a highly selective institution with demanding standards. Plenty of cadets are unable to maintain those standards and flunk out. The GOAT is respected for sticking it through and managing to graduate. A few past GOATs at West Point include George Armstrong Custer and the Confederate General George Pickett, whose doomed charge at Gettysburg has gone down in legend. Okay, those are 2 good examples of why you wouldn't want to be a GOAT if you can otherwise avoid it. Still, being last is better than flunking out, right? And there's one more strange twist to this tale. The Army-Navy rivalry is as old as the 2 services themselves. The popularity of the West Point versus Annapolis football game every year shows that this rivalry isn't going anywhere and has even made its mark on mainstream pop culture. The reason why West Point calls its lowest scoring cadet GOAT is because the United States Naval Academy's mascot is a goat. So if you're the GOAT at West Point, you serve a useful purpose in poking fun at the rival service. The United States Naval Academy at Annapolis has its own strange tradition. This one marks the end of freshman year, the so-called plebe year. The advancing plebes must literally advance skyward, climbing a 21-foot monument to replace a Dixie Cup hat with an upperclassman's hat. The catch? The monument is greased with 50 pounds of vegetable shortening, a semi-solid fat substance that comes from vegetable oils. The monument in question is the Herndon Monument, which was named in honor of Commander William Lewis Herndon after the ship he was on, the SS Central America, sank during a hurricane in 1857. The tradition has its roots in 1907. That year's advancing freshmen danced around the monument to celebrate their safe passage through the tough demands of their first year at the country's elite naval institution. Subsequent freshman classes repeated the act. Then in 1940, the plebes got the idea of climbing the monument, with the goal of getting one of their own on top. By 1947, a white officer's hat was sitting on top. In 1949, the climb became harsher as somebody got the idea of greasing the monument. Finally, the Dixie Cup appeared in 1962, and the modern tradition was fully formed. Today it's become an event that draws a lot of interest. Hundreds of spectators gather and thousands watch live streams online. It's a competitive event with timekeepers keeping track of each year's class. The 1972 class still holds the record, having accomplished the climb and hat swap in 1 minute 30 seconds. The 1998 class took the longest at 4 hours, 5 minutes and 17 seconds, but to be fair to them, somebody decided to glue and tape the hat on the monument that year, so it might not have exactly been a level playing field. But the Navy is a maritime service. What happens when these freshman sailors finally hit the sea lanes? Well, there's a strange tradition here too. One that calls back to an era that preceded the existence of the US Navy. This is the Crossing the Line ceremony, which is an initiation for young sailors passing the equator in a naval ship for the first time. Thanks to the reliability and power of modern ships, crossing the equator doesn't seem to be that big of a deal today. It happens routinely after all, but in the days of wooden sailing vessels, it was an important event, since many navigational details would need to change. Sailors needed to prove themselves ready. Today, an experienced sailor presides over the ceremonies in the role of King Neptune. The new sailors, called polywogs, are subjected to a number of gags, embarrassing chores, physical difficulties, and other hijinks. That might not be altogether appealing for today's polywogs, but they have it better than their predecessors, as the tasks were much more physically demanding and embarrassing. On modern ships, the ceremonies are mostly for fun and to build morale. They're also voluntary, although peer pressure will always play a role in things like this. A rundown of the day's activities might look like this. As the ship approaches the equator, a royal court of the Neptune Kingdom is called into being. King Neptune attends the court, along with Queen Neptune, who might be a man in woman's clothing, shellback courtiers, and even royal children. The polywogs are then called in, and they're tasked with entertaining the king with singing, dancing, poetry recitals, and so on. After that, the physical hardships begin. These can include lifting heavy objects, rolling a peanut across the ship from bow to stern, or even jumping on sharp objects. If the polywogs have satisfied King Neptune, they will then get to kiss the stomachs of the royal babies. But because these are creatures of the sea, there might well be gooey substances on them. They might also have to drink things almost as disgusting as the grog bowl, like hot sauce mixed with aftershave. At the end of the affair, the polywogs will take a dip in the seawater. After that, they're considered to have become shellbacks, meaning that they now have the privilege of doing the same thing to the next batch of poor polywogs on future occasions when the ship crosses the equator. To mark that privilege, they will have been inducted into the solemn mysteries of the ancient Order of the Deep by King Neptune himself. There's even a physical certificate or patch. One of the patches confirms its wearer as an official US Navy shellback, with King Neptune flanked by 2 mermaids in the center. There are grades of shellbacks too. The title of Golden Shellback is bestowed on mariners who have crossed both the equator and the international date line. One can also become an Emerald Shellback by crossing the equator at the Greenwich Meridian. Other crossing the line ceremonies might come on other occasions, such as when a ship moves past the remote line of the Antarctic Circle. A less intense occasion for sailors on US Navy ships at sea is Steel Beach Picnic Day. Who doesn't love a good day at the beach? For sailors on the ocean though, beach gateways are hard to come by. That's why sailors take to the decks of their vessels, which can range from aircraft carriers to submarines, and have a little summer fun. Naturally, the fun will be shaped by how large the deck is. Crews on aircraft carriers might get to enjoy large barbecue parties with inflatable pools and sports like volleyball or even touch football. There is less room on a submarine deck. But members in the silent service try to get what fun they can by driving golf balls from the deck, fishing from the comforts of their beach or lawn chairs, or having diving contests. Steel Beach events are often officially sanctioned by the United States Navy. It's a way of thanking the sailors in the service and giving them some well-deserved R&R in the middle of the ocean. Unlike the Army, Navy, and Marines, the Air Force has no centuries-long history to call upon, but it has its own ceremony that it claims calls back to a deeper time. This is the Royal Order of the Sword, and it was adopted by the NCOs of the US Air Force in 1967. The Royal Order of the Sword is one in which non-commissioned officers recognize an officer that's been particularly helpful in improving the lot of the enlisted service members. Officially, the honor's inspiration was Sweden's Royal Order of the Sword and the British Royal Order of the Sword. Specifically, the Air Force claims the tradition originates in 1522, when the famous King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden ordered the nobles he had commissioned as officers to in turn appoint other officers to his service. These were officially non-commissioned officers. Historians cast doubt on the Air Force's claims. There was never a British Royal Order of the Sword, for starters. Sweden did have one, but not until 1748, long after Gustavus Adolphus's time. The Swedes also haven't inducted anyone into their Order of the Sword since 1975. The Swedes didn't invent the NCO either. The role goes all the way back to Roman times at least. Despite the questionable history behind this honor, induction into the Order of the Sword is a grand occasion that the Air Force takes seriously. Dinner parties are built around the initiation rite. There, the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force bestows the honor. However, it doesn't mean that the service can't poke a little fun at itself even at times like this. Swords have had a symbolic military importance since the Bronze Age, but given that the Air Force isn't exactly a service that has a strong connection with swords, it has inverted this a little bit. The sword is still a big honor, but these awards are often designed to look ridiculous. The swords more closely resemble oversized and overpowered swords that look more at home in movies or video games than in an actual military setting. Judging by some of the pictures, Conan the Barbarian would probably be more comfortable with the Air Force's swords than any real person. But since airmen can't be expected to use swords in their duties, the Air Force can afford to be decorative with them. The Air Force takes care of its officers when they leave the service, although the treatment might not be as flattering. After their final or so-called Finny flight as fighter pilots, airmen experience a hosing from their comrades. Most of the time this involves water, though sometimes they can be doused with champagne in much the same way Major League Baseball teams celebrate playoff victories. The substances might not be limited to liquids. Some cases record airmen getting a hosing of string cheese, flour, mayonnaise, and other such substances. Those particular airmen will be a mess in the aftermath, but there's no need for hard feelings. It's just their comrades' way of saying thanks. The Army honors some of its officers with a more explosive ceremony. The US Army's MLRS systems have created a fierce reputation in conflicts around the world, and the officers that command these units naturally have a lot of responsibility. That doesn't mean that the enlisted service members can't have a little fun with their officers though. Upon welcoming a new officer, the enlisted service members will take that person's patrol cap, put it on the back of a rocket that's set to be tested in a live fire exercise. Naturally, the hat will be destroyed at the end of its joyride on the rocket's back. After the fireworks end, the enlisted men will find whatever remains of the tattered hat and take it back to their new commander as a welcome token. They'll even sign their names to the scraps. Rockets are expensive, but since these were going to be part of live fire tests anyway, no one cares that much about their use in this way. What's the point of having such great fireworks at your disposal if you can't at least have a little fun with them? Strange military traditions stretch back as far as military forces have been a reality in the world. They're part of a broader frame of human behavior in a group setting. Initiation rites, rewards, and common suffering are all ways for groups to distinguish themselves from other groups, and for their members to feel more at home with one another in comparison to the different groups they might need to compete with. These rituals are there to foster community and create stronger bonds. If you've all suffered through a grog bowl together, you're less likely to turn your back on your comrades when real trouble comes. That's why you can expect these seemingly strange and sometimes disgusting traditions to continue for a long time to come. They're less over the top than they were in the past, thanks to crackdowns on hazing, but the rituals persist, sometimes even when they're banned. What other strange ceremonies or rites exist in the US and other militaries around the world? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Also, make sure to hit the like button to support the channel, and subscribe for more military analysis from military experts. Now go and check out Shoot to Kill. How many soldiers can do this? Or click this other video instead.